Hey guys, my name's Jenna, and if you're new here, my husband and I spent the last couple of years making our home in North Carolina our dream space, but we couldn't ignore the nudge to move back to Arizona where we had originally moved from. So we packed up all of our belongings and headed back across the country on a week-long road trip where we made some fun stops along the way. And once we arrived in Arizona, we got settled into our temporary rental, and we had so much fun making that space match our style and giving it a cozier vibe. And while we were there, we kept an eye out for our dream home, which we had been looking for years at this point, and honestly we were starting to lose hope that we would find anything that excited us until we toured this one home. We immediately fell in love with the mountain views and recognized all of the potential that this place had. The only problem was that it needed a lot of work. I'm pretty sure the house hadn't been touched cosmetically since it was built, so we had our work cut out for us, especially since we're working with a limited budget, but the views and the bones are what sold us. So follow along as we renovate and turn this house into our dream home. So in last week's video, I showed you all my painstaking white paint color decision, as well as the final reveal of our luxury vinyl plank flooring. So with the exception of the painting, we hadn't really done many DIY improvements to our home at this point. It had been a lot of the professionals, but now I want to talk a bit more about the things on our to-do list. I still have to stain all of the cabinets. We might have to do that when we move in because right now we're kind of getting down to the wire, but some things the contractor and the professionals have to do is they actually have to get this vented to the outside. So this has all been framed, but it needs to have the vent in there, and then we need to obviously vent it to the outside. We also are going to put an old beam around the perimeter here, so that needs to be cut and installed. We got to get the sink, like the faucet, in there. We also want to try to get some cabinets and shelves in here. We might not get to that. Mike and I are going to do that ourselves, but another thing that we have to do is install an old barn beam here on the mantle. We have the beams in the garage. We just have to get them installed. And then something else that I think would be really nice to do before we move in is actually to paint the interior of the windows. Because it gets so hot here, I don't really think that we can do the outside, but these are kind of like a light beigey taupe color, and I think they'd be really beautiful to paint black. So, you know, we would have the white walls with the black windows, and it would help the space to just feel a lot more modern and have that contrast in there. So getting there, very close to the end, still a lot of little loose ends to tie up, but we are getting there and we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, so my plan is to lime wash this wall back here. And as you can see, our drywall guy, he smoothed the bottom part out, but I still have to do this area up here. This was because there was like a backsplash thing or like some cabinets that were ripped out, and he just repaired that. I didn't want to pay to have the whole area smoothed. I figured I could do this part myself. So I'm gonna mix up some joint compound real quick, put that on there, and then we'll sand it down and it'll be ready to prime for our lime wash. Okay, so I just got this joint compound from Lowe's and it was less than $25 for a huge bucket, and I still had a lot left over when I was done, but I just used this joint knife to spread it around, and the goal here is just to smear the joint compound over the texture to fill in all of those little gaps in the knockdown to create a more smooth surface. So what I did is I applied the product with the joint knife, and then I would go in with the magic trowel to smooth it all out and get rid of any extra bumps. And if I'm being honest, I don't think that the magic trowel was super necessary because a lot of the unevenness went away after the sanding stage, but it definitely helped me cut down on the amount of sanding that I had to do. And then a big reason that I wanted to do this before we moved in was just because the sanding of the joint compound creates so much dust. So I figured if I could at least get this step done before we moved in, I'd feel good with that. And I was pretty new to working with joint compound, at least with applying it to an entire wall. So here I think I spent a little too much time trying to make it perfect because, again, that sanding phase smooths it out pretty effortlessly. And at first I wasn't sure if I needed to do one coat or two, and my recommendation would be to do 2 coats because if you pile it on too thick, it will form bubbles, and if it's too thin, you'll just reveal the knockdown texture when you go to sand it. So you want a nice thick base before you sand, and I found the best way to achieve that is with 2 coats of joint compound. So here is a more detailed, slowed down shot of how I applied it. Just simple, smooth strokes And I also found that it helped to have a wet sponge on hand when applying the second coat to help everything blend together better. Okay, so all of the mudding is finally done. This took a couple of days to do. What do you think, Kona? You glad we're done? Yeah. Today I did this little area behind the fridge, which I probably could have gotten away without doing it, but I just wanted to make sure that it was all covered. So I'm gonna let all of this dry overnight, and then I'll come back tomorrow and sand it down because there's some little uneven areas that I just wanna make really smooth. So I'll come in and I'll sand that with a really fine grit sandpaper, and then it'll be ready for primer, and then we can lime wash it. Something else that I wanted to try to do before we moved in, but I didn't know if we would have time, is paint these window frames. Just make it feel a little bit more modern. And these are actually super old windows. These are probably original to the house, and they're either metal or aluminum. I don't know. They are not vinyl. So they should be really easy to just give a simple coat of spray paint to and update them. So that's what we're gonna do. Unfortunately, they're really, really dirty. I don't know if you guys can see in here, they need a lot of cleaning right now. So that's what we're gonna probably spend a majority of the day doing, is doing the cleaning and prep work, and then we'll give them a nice coat of paint just to update them and give them a fresh, modern look. Okay, so for cleaning the windows, I just used a toothbrush to loosen up the top layer of dust and dirt, and then I would go in with our shop vac and vacuum up all of that filth. And then I went in with a 220 grit sandpaper to just lightly scuff up the surface and give the paint something to stick to. I didn't press very hard when doing this, just a light little sand. Then I took this cleaner and I got all into those tracks. It's crazy how even after vacuuming, how much dirt and grime had built up in there. And this part was obviously very tedious, so something that I found that helped me out a ton was using a little butter knife. I just wrapped a lint-free cloth around it, and this really helped to get into all of those tiny cracks and crevices and the hard to reach places that I wouldn't have been able to just get with my fingers. And once everything was all clean, I went in with a cotton ball and some acetone to get rid of any remaining grease and grime. So once each window was all clean and ready, we started taping them off with painter's tape. And I found that it actually went a lot faster to work with smaller sections of tape just because it helped me get a lot more precise with the lines. And then we covered the glass part of the windows with pieces of plastic drop cloths that we cut into smaller pieces. And I will say that the prep for this was definitely super time consuming and took up a lot of our time. The actual painting of the windows went super quickly, but the prep was very, very tedious. So this is what the first window looked like before we went in with the paint. And this was the only window that looked like this, and you will see why in a second. But first we wanted to take a break to pick out some pendants for the kitchen. And at this point we were feeling a little rushed because the electrician was coming to install them. So on one of our trips to Home Depot, I spotted these guys for 80 bucks, and they reminded me a lot of the larger version that they sell at Pottery Barn for over $2,000. So I thought that they had a very high-end look to them and that they would go with our Spanish modern style. So our electrician came and he installed them, and I was pretty happy with them. I think in the short time since I've purchased them, they've actually discontinued this exact pendant, but I know Target sells a very similar one, and I like how they have that rustic look and they resemble iron, and they just give our kitchen a nice pop of contrast. And I thought that for the price, they really did a nice job of elevating the space, and they'll look nice when they're going to be paired with our woven bar stools. So I was trying to picture the kitchen as a whole when picking them out. So now that we have that under control, it's time to get back to painting the windows. So I actually just used black spray paint for this, and I've seen videos of professionals using spray paint, and our contractor even said that this is how he painted his windows in his home. So while it felt a little weird, spray paint seemed like the way to go. So here I am with no protective gear, nonchalantly just painting our windows. And I was very glad that we started with my office and not the main living room windows as a test, just to make sure that this all went well before continuing on, because I had never spray painted inside before. So honestly, I did not realize how much of a mess this stuff makes and how I should have 100% been wearing at least a mask. But the spray started to become a little much, so I just took our shop vac and kind of held it there while I sprayed in hopes of cutting down on the overspray and the fumes, but it didn't really end up doing much in the end. So here's a little behind the scenes look of the setup and what the window ended up looking like after the first coat of paint. I honestly thought that this would be enough protection from the overspray with all of the plastic covering the walls and the floors, but I was definitely wrong. This stuff got everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Like it was all over the floors, even on the other side of the room where the floors weren't covered. So my plan was to do the second coat on this window and then rethink our entire approach. So for the second coat, I wanted to make sure to flip the latches up to get those spots that were covered when the latch was closed. And then I also wanted to crack the window just a hair to get that little line on the end of the window that's covered when the window is closed. So this time I went to the store and I got a protective painting coat and an N95 mask and applied the second coat of spray paint. So here again, I'm using the shop vac, and I think it probably helped a little bit, but not enough to where I noticed a big difference or anything. So for our next set of windows, we decided to make these paint booths, and our plan was to tape off an entire section with the wall, ceiling, and floor all completely covered with drop cloths and see how that would work. And we were hopeful that this would contain the overspray, but still give me enough room to move around and paint. Okay, so we were cleaning windows and putting up tape, and we just took a break to look at this sunset. Like, are you joking? It's so pretty. I can't believe we get to live here with this view all out our living room windows. Like, that's insane. Arizona has the best sunsets, in my opinion, don't you think, Cum? She's like, I just want to play fetch. Go get it. So at this point, we were getting tired, but the sunset literally framed by the windows gave us an extra dose of motivation that we definitely needed. So Mike finished up making the first paint booth that night and then early in the next morning. And this is what it ended up looking like when it was all finished and ready. It was really great to have everything all contained so that the overspray wouldn't contaminate the rest of the room. Even though this made our super tedious prep routine even more tedious and time consuming, I felt like it was worth it because when the paint was dry, you could just literally rip the whole booth down, roll it up so that all of the spray paint residue was left in the drop cloths, and then we could just throw it away and there really wasn't much of a mess at all. So the only negative that I found other than the time-consuming nature of the paint booth was that for the person spraying inside the booth, it would definitely get a little fumey in there. Like if I was in there for too long, my eyeballs would start to burn and the air just felt really flammable. So obviously you'd want to be very careful with this. The larger the booth, the less intense it was, but when I would do the smaller ones, like this one above the kitchen sink, the fumes would get really intense. So I just made sure to paint quickly and efficiently, and I would take breaks if I needed to. So switching from one messy project to another, this is where I sanded down the joint compound once it had all dried on the wall. And also you can see that this was after I had prepped the window, but before I made the paint booth. So I actually had to go back and clean the window again because I wasn't thinking about all of the dust that I was going to kick up from the sanding. But I just used this wall sander and 220 grit drywall sandpaper to smooth everything out. I also sanded by hand in the tighter places where it was awkward to use the wall sander. And then just to get any of the remaining dust off of the wall, I used this hand broom to brush off any excess sanding dust that was stuck to the wall. Okay, so a little update. We are starting to get stressed out because we have to move in a week and nothing at the rental is packed up. And this is going a lot slower than we thought, which obviously with renovations is usually the case. But we thought we were gonna get all these windows finished over the weekend, and it is now Monday and I still have to do the bay window. I still have to finish taping here. Mike is back at work, so I'm solo, so it usually goes a lot slower with that. But we were able to get that window done and that window done. I just wanted to wait until the daytime so I could see in the natural light if I missed any spots, and then I'll rip these down. Just because these took so long to make, I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss any spots or anything. So I have to do this. And then another thing that I really wanted to do before we moved in was the cabinets, because I'm going to be refinishing them. I really want to keep the wood look, so it's going to be a big challenge. But I'm gonna have to sand this right here. Obviously I can take the doors into the garage and stuff, but that's gonna make a huge mess. So I really wanted to do that before we moved in, just so we'd be able to unpack all of our kitchen stuff, no problem. But I think we're running out of time and we might have to do it while we're living in the house. I'm not sure. Also, in hindsight with these windows, we should have done these first before we started painting and before the floors were in, but I didn't have the idea until like a week ago. So I was like, oh my gosh, we gotta hurry up and do that before we get furniture in the house. So it has been nice to do it without the furniture, but we're definitely getting stressed and I'm starting to put a lot on our project plate. So we need to just kind of like focus, try to get the stuff done that we can, and just whatever's left will be what's left. So a little stressful right now, but that's usually how it goes, right? So I'm just gonna get to work and see what I can get done today by myself. Okay, so the windows are all done and I think it makes a huge difference in this space. It goes with our iron accents and I don't know, I just feel like it looks a lot more true to that Spanish style. So I personally think it was worth it. And especially because these are the windows that frame our view. The contrast really just helps to draw your eye out the windows. So yay for a successful project, even though it took a lot longer than we thought. So another thing that I forgot to mention why I wanted to paint the windows so badly was because we are eventually planning on adding a paned black sliding door. So this way, this will be able to match when we put that in and we won't have a random black slider with tan windows. But I am so happy with how this project turned out. I hope you guys enjoyed watching the progress this week. Thank you all so much for being here and I hope you have a wonderful week and I will see you guys next week for part 4.